get your beer at the English Garden. So with this, I would like to introduce and welcome on the panel the three panelists, Bernhard, Christina, and Cláudia. Please come to the stage. The idea is that these three panelists represent the diversity and expertise of the academy, and especially also it's three persons that have a lot of experience about bringing knowledge to action, making change happen, which is the vision of these 2 days. I introduce you to the three panelists, and then we will take some time to discuss the 4 societal topics that have already been introduced to you together. But this is only the start of the discussion. You won't have time to ask questions in the plenary, because the hope is that you will become more and more nervous to talk, and then in the brainstorm sessions, you will immediately start to talk and we collect your ideas. So with this, I introduce to you the first panelist, Cláudia Amorim. And we put actually the link to Daylight Matters webpage on the slides to remind you that we now have this wonderful tool. As has been mentioned before, it has won a prestigious design award, a gold award, and it's really a beautiful webpage. And I use that to introduce to you the three panelists. Cláudia, on your page, you would like to drink coffee with Frida Kahlo. I think that's a good start, because you represent here architecture and design, but we also have artists, so you probably have also the job to represent the arts, and you're from South America.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you have just become a DLA member, and in your little speech you said you teach students to love daylight.
Yeah.
And I wonder, with Frida Kahlo, you probably also talk about the love of daylight. Would that be a topic to discuss with Frida?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, I have recently been in Mexico City. Of course, I knew Frida Kahlo, but I was really in love with the atmosphere and the colors of the house and so on. But yes, I am an architect. I have a degree in architecture and urbanism in Brazil, and I have a PhD in energetic and lighting, day lighting issues in Universidade de Roma La Sapienza. And since then, I'm really involved with daylight. I think it's a wonderful topic for architects, but we have a challenge: how to make them really to put daylight into a technical, correct way, but to be passionate by this. Not only a technical issue, not only mathematical, physics, but to do it with passion, to do it inspiratedly. And yes.
So you really bring together passion, creativity. That's something we love as scientists and artists, but also this hard work of the gritty, nitty details of regulations and policy work that someone has to do. That's so important that action happens.
Yeah, of course.
So with this, I might introduce the second person on the panel. This is Christina Blume. You're a psychologist by training, a chronobiologist, and on your webpage, I read that you love a song called Summer, and it's a celebration of a summer day that should never end. And so this is an obvious choice for a chronobiologist, but I also know that you're a sleep scientist, and for me, the endless nights of winter are the best time for a long sleep. So what is the best season for a chronobiologist?
So personally, I have to say, I love all seasons, and I especially love the seasonality, because it feels like whenever I'm fed up with one season, the next one's coming up. I also do winter sports, so being in Switzerland is a great place for doing winter sports. So I love all of this. And from a scientific perspective, I think it's super interesting to explore seasonality. So currently, for example, I enjoy that very much, because we're diving into the phenomenon of spring fatigue, which seems to be particularly present in the German-speaking countries, related also to the question how language then shapes how we feel. And by the way, it seems that we're always fatigued, and not specifically during spring. But one of my passions is also science communication. So I'm the host or co-host of a podcast on the National Public Radio Deutschlandfunk in Germany. Actually, I've realized that tomorrow we're going to celebrate our 2nd birthday. So turning what we know into hopefully societal change. The question is also how do we measure that? Because often we don't. We produce outcomes, but then we do not ask what is the out. So we produce output, but we don't ask what is the outcome or perhaps even the impact, and it gets more and more difficult to measure this. So this is also something that I'm very much interested in and where I might be able to contribute to knowledge.
We will certainly talk more about science communication and how you find the right balance between simple messages. And it's probably too simply to say it's summer is the best time or winter. And we hear that all the time, eat red meat, don't eat meat and all of that. So you can tell us more about this experience in a moment. And with this, I introduce to you this, I have this problem with this, but our third panelist, Bernhard Wehrli, you're an aquatic chemist and an environmental scientist at ETH and at Eawag. And on your webpage, I read that most chemists are good cooks, but only few cooks are good chemists. I thought you're a good cook. And I wondered, what has daylight to do with chemistry? Probably there's something like photochemistry, and I wondered whether daylight chemistry is just more of the same, like more schnitzel and knödel, or whether it's something completely different, whether it's some kind of nouvelle cuisine when daylight plays into chemistry. What does daylight have to do with aquatic chemistry?
Well, the cooking is something wonderful. As chemists, we are interested in the transformation of stuff. And then I got interested in lakes. And in lakes, there are small organisms. They are the best cooks in the world. They use just water, a little bit of nutrients, and sunlight, and CO2 from the atmosphere, and they create life. They create the fuel that fuels the whole food chains that goes up to dolphins and sharks and everything. No, it's if you think about it, this cooking by the little cells that can do photosynthesis is a marvel. And on the long run, we have to learn more about it and maybe transform our society again to the solar age.
And as an environmental scientist, you also have a lot to do with how can you bring knowledge to society and to decision makers, and often involving complex issues. We have been involved in saving our lakes in Switzerland. But the way you do it often is what we would call production of knowledge or transdisciplinary research, that the stakeholders or decision makers are already involved in the research project, if I understand that right.
Yes, yes. So there is a little success story. We were designing the first scheme for an eco-label for hydropower, to make hydropower ecologically more benign. And to do that, we first we had a brainstorming, like we have afterwards. No, you need a brainstorm, you need options. What could we do? And then we took these options. We went out to the industry, to NGOs, to the regulators, and asked them which option has the most resonance. What could have traction? And with that information, we selected one, this eco-label, and worked for 5 years. And in the work, it was essential to have a core group of people who really want to do that, and a large network of different experts who come in workshops, and you discuss things so that you kind of synthesize the knowledge. Because as natural scientists, we always want to have another PhD student and more research. No, that's not what is asked for. You need to work with what's available and make it available, and then in the end it worked out. And you also need a process to hand it over to somebody who takes it further.
And we had that we could use your expertise in moderating such processes, because you were also the moderator of the group that developed the 4 societal topics that will structure the 2 days and the coming years. And because you have led this process, I hand over to you to introduce shortly the 4 societal topics to us that we will then further discuss.
Okay.
I have a slide with them listed so that we don't forget them.
So I should mention this was really teamwork. Marilyn, Monica, Roman, Christoph, Manuel, Bianca, Rana. We were a group of people, and out of these ideas we had the task to write a one-pager, and this is the outcome. So there's a one-pager for each of these. The first 2 are maybe really policy-oriented. The right to daylight is a push project. We want to push this idea of right to daylight into the policy process. And there is a model. In my field, there was a decade-long discussion about the human right to water and sanitation. It took NGOs, activists, a broad coalition of people who wanted to have that. And in 2010, the United Nations adopted it as a human right. Maybe this is a high bar, but maybe we can succeed. We will need a kind of a summary of the evidence that is available that shows the requirements for daylight and the benefits for daylight. Maybe in the sense also that we need 7-8 hours sleep, or that we need to go outside and walk 10,000 steps or something like that, something easy to communicate. Okay, this is the push thing. And then in our group, we realized that the transition to net zero that is discussed with climate change and all these things is something that makes people fearful, and you have to lose, there's a fear of loss. So we thought we need a pull effect. We need a vision for a solar society, maybe a visual representation of a future solar society. We need stories with the elements that make this possible, so that there is hope that we can do it. So they are in a way complementary. So there's a push and a pull. And then with the other 2 topics, we were building on the strengths of the community of the Daylight Academy. And we asked ourselves, what are the opportunities and what are the pathways that are less traveled so far? Where can we expand? And in the area of health, we thought there is an opportunity to link the Daylight Academy and our agenda with epidemiologists, the epidemiological studies, to have more sound evidence. And on the other hand, there's a whole discussion, a whole new field popping up with the One Health paradigm, that is a kind of a cultural anthropology of medicine. This links also to this idea to have more input from the global south, a more diverse community. So there's a lot to do, and maybe the practical things are, again, a synthesis of knowledge and tools to do citizen science, etc. And finally, the architects, the urban people, there is the elephant in the room that is increasing urban density. So the idea is higher urban density is a solution against urban sprawl. Everything is closer together. You have this 5-minute city or 15-minute city or whatsoever. But how to do that so that people still have daylight is a big issue. There are objective things like latitude and climate, but there is also kind of the software or the subjective things, that is the habits of people, the cultural, how the culture works in terms of daylight and going outside, and to map that, and maybe also to have interventions and small pilot projects would be a great opportunity for the Daylight Academy. At least that's what we thought in a nutshell. In the end, it's up to the members to define that, and that will happen in the next step.
And so these 4 one-pagers you have already, and if not, you can get them from the welcome desk. They are among our documents. So we have a little moment to discuss the 4 topics with one of these nice visualizations from the Daylight Matter webpage. I would like to start with the global health topic, also because Bernhard has just emphasized it, and this increasing the global reach of our academy in South America, Africa, Asia is one of the core strategic aims of the next phase. And health is, as you said, something that is very context dependent. So maybe you can start to talk a bit about these differences between the northern context and southern context in relation to daylight. It doesn't really have to be with health, but to start with a more global perspective, our panel discussion.
Yes, I would like to start talking a little bit about requirements and metrics of daylight. This is a huge problem in my perspective. We have done a very huge collection of documents, I mean, standards and regulations, codes, documents that are used in practice to build a city or a building. And we have identified that we have a huge amount of metrics, 120 metrics, different daylight metrics. Of course, they are related with different aspects. For example, quantity of daylighting, glare, sunlight, and view. We have different aspects. And we have a very huge amount of geometric metrics, design metrics that relates with the size of the window, the distance between the buildings. That also, it's not exactly a daylight metric, but it influences on daylight practice. And what we have analyzed from this collection, this big collection, this is a technical committee in CIE, International Lighting Commission, is TC 361. If you are interested, we are developing this collection and this analysis. And we saw that in mandatory documents, almost no dynamic metric. I'm talking about the metrics that really consider the different climates, that are climate adapted. For those who don't know, for example, spatial daylight illuminance, that is something that analyzes related with the climate and the types of sky, how much daylight you will have during the year in a space. But this is not a common metric in mandatory documents. It means that architects and urbanists don't use it. The most common metric in these documents is daylight factor. Daylight factor is a very familiar metric for architects. It's related also with the sky, is the quantity of light that I can have in a related with the sky, the external amount of lighting, daylighting, but it only considers overcast sky. So you can imagine how, if we use this metric in Brazil, where we have a huge amount of radiation, sunlight, and clear skies, what can happen? And if you add also the new tendency of glazing facades, you can imagine how can be this problem. So this is a first problem that we need to think about metrics that architects can understand and can use in different contexts, in different climates, and different, because it will really bring a more correct practice of daylighting. The architects, they need to conciliate a lot of demands in the building. I mean, it's not only about daylight, it's about a lot of things, acoustics, thermal comfort, and statics, and a lot of construction. And so it's very difficult to conciliate. But if we have more practical metrics and easy metrics to be used by architects in all the world, it would be an aspect that would facilitate the job.
Maybe we will continue.
I have another thing, but I can.
We can maybe come back to that in a moment. What we see from your statement is one of the big challenges we have over the 2 days is to define our audiences for what we do. And we had this already in the General Assembly. On the one hand, we had the statement that we should address the WHO. On the other hand, Lenka told us about the Czech group that works on very specific regulations also in the Czech Republic. And on the other hand, we also have to define the audience in terms of, for instance, professional groups. Do we talk to architects or the health professionals and so on and so forth? And so you are from Science Communication, you have this podcast, national broadcast company, so you talk to a very broad audience, but you must be thinking a lot about how to imagine audiences for science communication.
And actually, this is what I really recommend also. So I think that a strategic approach, and it's been mentioned before, to communication is really important, because only then you can tailor it, and then you can, at least to some extent, because you can only control it to a certain extent, but then you can try to make it as efficient as possible, and as effective as possible. And the question of a target group is one of the most central questions you can ask. There is also something we say in science communication. There is no such thing as a general public. So saying we talk to a general public or lay people is just way too easy. And there are certain, of course, aspects according to which you can stratify people. You can stratify them according to age, which is, for example, very important when it's about communication channels. So how do I reach people? When it's about language, how do I address people? You would address people in their 20s or early 30s differently from people in their 60s. That's then also linked to the topic. So people in their 20s might be interested in different topics than people in their 60s. You can also ask, do you address people who are easy to reach, or they're also difficult to reach target groups? There's a very good illustration on that. So there are manifold aspects that make people difficult to reach. But then the question is, there is this Pareto principle, which is usually applied in a different context, but you could also say that with 20% of the effort, you reach about 80% of the people. But to reach the remaining 20%, you need to make an extra effort. So you need to invest 80% probably to reach those. And then it's a decision whether you want to only reach the easy to reach target groups. But then talking about the global south, or people that may not be easy to reach, then the question is, maybe that is your target group. So I think very consciously thinking about all these aspects is very helpful in making or developing a targeted strategy, because otherwise you end, and I exaggerate now, but if you say, well, let's just write a few blog posts. Well, this is quite a lot of work for people, especially if no one reads them.
So there I have a question. If you want to move from knowledge to action, you need active people. So isn't it the priority to reach out to active people, those who can be motivated to do something?
That could be a target group. So multipliers could be a target group.
Yeah.
But then so what we distinguish, what I said before, you distinguish output, which would be, for example, blog posts, outcome, which is, for example, the number of readers, but then also impact. And impact is, for example, the change you create in behavior, in attitude. And in order to create impact, you can use multipliers, but you can also, with the output you create, you can also create impact. And I think it's a way of, the question is more, what do you want to reach, and how much resources do you have, rather than that you need to question whether you can have an impact.
What I learned from this is, at the Daylight Academy, in terms of outcome, we are already great. Our blogs are read quite often, and the Daylight Awareness Week is attended, and so impact is now our next challenge in a way. We have one of the 4 topics that already has a rather focused target group. That's daylight and urban density. There, a working group has been working for a few years already on specifying what that means, and we have daylight paper out on the table. You can read that. Carlo will also present shortly the results of this group together. So there we have already done some work in this direction. I would like to talk next about the topic right to daylight, because something we have also started to discuss now is how can we simplify complex scientific messages? And you have mentioned that this right messaging, the messaging with right to water, right to daylight, human rights, that's one way of simplifying a message. And I learned that yesterday you had a conversation with Lisa as an architect in the framework of these conversations films that the Daylight Academy also produces, and you also discussed this, whether right is the right concept to communicate. What do you want to communicate to the public? That daylight matters for everyone.
Yes, so Lisa wrote a nice little piece about the right to daylight and why it's relevant. I mean, in the context of right to water, there was a big discussion whether it is the right thing to do. And it was a discussion between people who thought every individual should have this right, because otherwise, if you don't drink, have no access to water, you die. If you don't have access to daylight, we know that there is severe consequences, especially in childhood, that there is a crisis, an epidemic of myopia and development issues. So in a way, it's a natural thing that we should have a right to daylight. On the other hand, maybe there's a criticism that this individualistic thing is a Western idea or out of the Enlightenment, that in some parts of the global South, the community is a stronger political agent than the individual. Mm-hmm. And there the daylight is also kind of the part of the commons. It's a common resource. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you see that. I mean, if you build something and you take away the daylight of somebody else, it's not fair, and there might be some resistance of those who get underprivileged.
Yeah, theoretically, yes, but in practice, in global South, in my country, we have a lot of informal settlements also that people build without any architect. So they are more aware about to have more space. If they lose daylight, they are not really very worried about this. This is the reality.
Yeah.
But we have another aspect that is very important, is that are the standards or the laws, the regulations that we need to face when we are designing. And this is a very, this is a very important process and sometimes neglected, because we trust a lot in only technical issues. This is correct, daylight, we need this amount of daylight, and this must be in the standard, and so on and so on. But when you are in a process of standardization or legal requirements, there are many stakeholders, not only the scientists, the academia, and the practitioners, and the people that are advocating for daylight, but there are also economical interests. And this is why I think that we need, we had an experience in Brazil recently. Because I participate of many legal standardization processes, and I saw this in practice, because you have a good intention, you know that this is important, but when the economic value or the people that are really buying, constructing, and want to have a economic return, this is really forgotten.
Yes.
So I think that is very important also, that we think about what is the economic value of daylight. How can we prove this?
Yes.
To have a better balance.
Maybe if I may add, maybe part of the success story with Right to Water was that the United Nations, they installed a special rapporteur on human right to water. And they went out to all over the world and did a reporting. What is the situation, access to drinking water? And this is lacking with daylight. There is no global mapping or kind of a global survey how people live and maybe what the consequences are if in the end, almost everybody is living in a city, and almost everybody is spending 90% of the time indoors.
Yeah.
And I think the economic value on the one side is certainly very important, but what is for me also very important with this topic, right to daylight, is the social justice dimension. And you mentioned clearly informal settlements, there are huge differences between rich and poor neighborhoods in the access to daylight and also workplace health. There are many jobs where you simply don't have access to daylight, and often the people that work in these jobs work in the neighborhoods with no garden and small apartments and so. So I think the social justice issue at the global scale, global south, global north, and that very specific scales between individual people is very important. And I would also like that to the experience of working for or at hospitals. You also work at the Psychiatric Hospital Research Institute. So it's also about people that have abilities or lack abilities. Maybe you can talk a little bit also about this aspect of justice.
Sure. So what I want to mention first is that I personally feel when you hear something like right to water, every single person in that room has been thirsty. So it's perfectly understandable for everyone that we need water and that the right to clear water. Oh yeah, thank you very much. So cool. That was a hidden message. No. But I think so in the communication about the right to daylight, one challenge will be to make people aware of why that should be a right. Because it's not intuitively understandable, right? I mean, if you say, of course, we spent more than 90% of our days in buildings and, with limited, let's call it limited access to daylight. But no one, or most people would not consciously be able to tell what the consequences are. As compared to the consequences of not having access to water. And I think this is where we have to find a way to communicate and make people aware of the beneficial effects of daylight and why they should seek daylight.
Yes.
Right.
I mean,
but I think there is a difference between the right to light and the right to water.
Yeah.
I remember when I went to school in a Swiss mountain village, and in our school we were forced outside during breaks. There was no way that we could stay inside, even if it was raining, if it was snowing. We had to go outside, but also the outside space was attractive for a child. We were there running around and doing things, stupid things maybe, but there has to be not only a push but also a pull.
Yeah.
And maybe we lost a bit both. Some people lost the awareness, but we also built spaces that are completely unattractive to go outside.
Absolutely.
That's a disaster.
Absolutely.
You have to change it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, just to address your point of mental health, of course, I mean, we know about the effects of daylight on sleep, but also mental health. And of course, both factors are again connected. Sleep is essential for mental health and resilience. And I think, to combine this, so in the hospital where I work, we have this really lovely park. And many patients actually report that they like being outside, and there are benches in the park where enjoy the sun. And sometimes when you walk to get your lunch, then you see people enjoying the sun there. And I say, well, congratulations, you've discovered this. But then at the same time on the wards, I mean, we're the research institution in the hospital, but I remember that a few years ago there was a new building, and then I think it was just when I came to Basel, but then I think it was only towards the end when we were actually contacted and asked to give input about the lighting, where you can ask, well, you have the experts on campus, why don't you involve them right from the beginning? And that, of course, applies to many other institutions as well.
And that's also why I asked this question, because I think when we talk about transdisciplinarity, it means that we have to try to include early on very different life experiences, because we all have blind spots. For us, working in such nice buildings with all the daylight that comes in, big windows, it's not evident that that others work in a place without daylight or have different capabilities, and it's more difficult for them to access daylight. And that's probably very important for us, that we try to bring in very different life experience in our today's discussions. We have only a few minutes left, and we have one last topic. I saved it for the end because it's this visionary, future-looking, broad topic of future solar societies. And Roman Kerr in the working group, he emphasized many times that we have also to address these big issues like climate change, and then that we have to think about storytelling, narratives, visualizations, artistic work that gives us this positive vision. And I would like to have a last round of what are the kind of positive visions that you hope to get for our society from the 2 days or from the next years of daylight society work. Just maybe 3 short future-oriented stories and hopes that you might share here as the end of our session. It's a difficult one. The big questions are all the difficult ones, but who would like to start?
Do you want to start?
Well, one thing is mobility. I think we designed our cities for the cars, and there's lots of space for cars. And the future cities will have no cars, full stop. And the roads will be green ribbons connecting people and children who are playing outside and the elderly who tell them fairy tales. That's my vision.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I would like to see a world that vernacular solutions for architecture or more regional solutions could be welcome, and not only one style follow the world. I'm not talking about to build with not prefabricated materials or modern materials, but I'm talking about to think in the construction in relation to the climate more than now, because now we have a very international architecture. We see the buildings are very similar in all the world, and this is really a problem. If you're thinking on the climate as a design driver, I think we could reach very good solutions also for daylight, not only thermal comfort, energy efficiency, daylighting, health, and so on. So this is my vision, to valorize the local knowledge and culture, to build more regional buildings, and to be also modern but local solutions. That's my vision for the future.
So climate change from a science communication perspective is a challenging topic because people don't want to listen to it. Well, bluntly said. So my vision is really that we find a way to make an impact on society, and make people recognize that it is important to incorporate daylight as a health factor into our lives, especially because climate change, maybe especially in the Central European countries where we don't usually have AC, because what happens when it's very warm outside is that we close the blinds and we stay inside, and we deprive ourselves of daylight with, the consequences we know. So I'd hope that we can really, through communication, make an impact and change how we think about this important health factor.
Yes.
So this stories is light matters. This slogan of the webpage really makes sense, and I hope that this is what you take with you for the coming 2 days. And we will talk about visions, but we will also work on very concrete project proposals, and you also got a sheet that explains you the procedures that to get to the submission of the proposal by